booth fighters. I don't know if you know what a booth fighter is.
No, I don't.
Well, the booth fighters were the old pros who would go around the fairgrounds and take on all comers, right? So you would have the fairground guy would be on the platform outside his tent, and you would have maybe 5 or 6 boxers up there with him who were proper boxers. And if somebody in the crowd wanted to pay a specific amount, they could come in and fight, and they would pick their opponent right from the lineup. So this guy was, and they would go in and fight and then lose their money.
Right.
And, yeah, join. You'll feel part of it, and that's the thing about boxing. As soon as you walk in that gym, you don't know anybody. You don't know a soul in that gym. Within 5-10 minutes, you are immersed. You are part of it.
What's up, coaches? Welcome to Your Coach's Coach. I am your host, Coach Justin Blackwell. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a NASM certified personal trainer, a boxing coach, as well as a father of 2, based out here in Los Angeles, California. I created this podcast to help you gain insight on how successful coaches, both established and up and coming, have navigated and continue to navigate their world of sports, fitness, and movement. You're going to hear some really raw stories and some really incredible journeys on this podcast, and I hope you find this podcast valuable, useful, and entertaining. If you do, please like, subscribe, and share. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. So first and foremost, I think what I have leaned towards doing, Frank, is kind of introducing how I've come across the guests that I've met so far. So I'd love to kind of start with that story, and then we'll dive, deeper into your story. And just to kind of give you an overview, and I'm sure you heard it while I was talking to Paul, this podcast is called Your Coach's Coach, and it's really designed to educate up-and-coming coaches, even established coaches, on, number one, just some really good stories and really raw stories. But in addition, just provide any insight as to how, veterans of the game have navigated the industry, have navigated their careers, just to, see if we can educate and enlighten in any way possible. So that's really the goal of this podcast. And in terms of how I found and came across your profile, I think as many of us in the past year, I was scrolling through Instagram. I see this image of this gentleman, hitting this bag. And I'll tell you, my modality of sports, Frank, is boxing. That's been my passion for over the last decade.
Yeah.
And one thing I know is a good jab when I see one, right? And so I see this amazing jab, and I couldn't help but follow you. And I think it's only right that you've blown up over the last year. I think ultimately, as I dove deeper into who you were and your story and some of your social media, the big thing that I loved about you and your philosophy was your philosophy around content and sharing value with the world. And so I was connected through the jab, but I stayed for the value of the content. For my guests listening, this is Mr. Frank Gilfeather, former Scottish amateur champion, over 200 amateur fights in Scotland. I think you even fought, I think it was Evan Armstrong, if I'm getting that correct, who went to be on
I did.
television.
Yes,
Yeah,
Canada.
exactly. You're also a reporter, a journalist, and so you've done so much. So, I just want to say thank you, Frank, for taking the time out of your day. You're over in Scotland to join me and partake in this podcast with me.
You're very welcome. Of course you are.
Yes, absolutely. So let's start at the beginning, Frank. I always like to start at the beginning with all of my guests, before, the fame and the Instagram notoriety. Who was Mr. Frank Gilfeather as a child? Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? What was life like for you as a youngster coming up?
Well, I grew up in a little part of Dundee, which is a city on the east coast of Scotland. And the area I grew up in was called Lochee, Lochee.
Okay.
And it was principally there. But I mean, Lochee was founded, if you like, based on the jute industry. So Dundee was a city of 3 J's. jute jam journalism, right? So the biggest jute industry in the entire world was centered in Dundee. The jute mills, there were more than 100 jute mills in Dundee.
Okay.
The second J was jam, which was marmalade, really, because it was the Keeler family who invented marmalade, if you like. Invented it, that's not the right word, but they came up with the idea of marmalade. That's another story. And the third J, journalism, was the DC Thompson Empire, Dennis the Menace, all these comics, the Beano, the Dandy, newspapers, publishing. Oh, they're in TV and all that stuff. So I was raised in this kind of little, almost like a ghetto of Dundee called Lochee. And Lochee was a vibrant little suburb which contained a little enclave of Irish immigrants and Scots-Irish who went to Dundee, to Lochee initially to work in the jute mills. And this little enclave was called Tipperary because the original people who lived there were from Tipperary in Ireland. And so it was always known as Tipperary. My father grew up there. My grandparents lived there.
Right.
My dad used to run boxing clubs. He started running boxing clubs towards the end of World War II. And when I was 4, he had a boxing club in Lochee, and I would go along there at the age of 4 just to really be babysat. Right. My mother would say to my dad, look, if you're going, take Frankie with you. And so I had 2 older brothers, Daniel, who was a British youth champion, 11 years older than me, and Dennis, who was a Scottish senior champion internationalist. He's 9 years older. And so I would just toddle along with everybody. And I was unaware at the time, of course, but I was soaking up all this kind of knowledge and the atmosphere and the sweaty gym and the pounding of the bag and all that kind of stuff. And it seemed a natural progression for me just to become a boxer. So I fell into that. My dad ran lots of clubs over a period of, over decades, really. Right. And I just, wherever he went, I followed. And that's how I got into it.
Yeah. And can I ask you, sorry, I got me to cut you off. I was just curious. At this time, did boxing excite you? I know oftentimes when, it's a family affair, maybe it's exciting, maybe it's just normal, you don't really care for it. But what was kind of your feeling at this young age about boxing? Was it something you were drawn to?
Well, not particularly in the way I think you're inferring, but what was always around was everybody that came to my house was connected with boxing.
Right.
Basically, so we would have people dropping in at any time, day or night, and it was all about boxing talk. Not so much about boxing talk, but about the boxing club, what we were doing, who was going there, were there fights arranged here, there, and everywhere. And so it was a constant. My dad was either in the boxing club running it, not necessarily coaching, because he had coaches there, right, but he was running it. He was the secretary of the club, so he made sure all the admin was done through him. He was on various councils and committees and so on connected with amateur boxing. And then, at that age, I remember vividly, there are 2 things I remember. I remember when I was about 9, probably about 9 years old. And I remember the excitement of knowing that Rocky Marciano was boxing a guy called Don Cockle, right, who was a British champion. And I remember, because we used to read Boxing News, which was the weekly Bible of boxing in the UK. Right. We had it delivered every week. The Boxing News had virtually all professionals, and the final kind of 4 or 6 pages would be the amateurs. So I was up to date with what was happening in the US and so on, with all the world champions and all the fights that were coming up. And I remember being excited when I was about 10, because Don Cockle was boxing Rocky Marciano, and it was being broadcast live. So it was about 3 a.m. in UK time.
Right.
Broadcast live from, I think, New York. And I'd sent my dad, what would be the chances of, would you waken me at 3 o'clock so I could listen to the fight? And he did. And we listened to the fight together. And that began my real excitement. And then, almost, around that same age, when the top boxing teams, amateur teams in the world, would come to Scotland to face the Scottish team, I was always in the audience.
Right.
And because of my dad, it was kind of access all areas. So I was in the changing room, I was listening, I was watching, I was looking at guys putting on their wraps and or bandages, as we called them. We never called them wraps.
Right.
And all that kind of, the smell of the wintergreen when it was rubbed into their muscles, and all that was really exciting for me. Right. I remember when the American team came to my hometown, Dundee, and my dad brought them. He brought them over. They boxed in London on the Thursday night, and my dad had got them up from London to box Scotland on the Saturday night. There were 3,000 people in the hall. Wow. Fabulous. And I was going about at that time and watching and listening, and I was kind of agog at some of the fighters. Fantastic.
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about two things? Number one, what was boxing culture? Because you talk about how there were newspapers and stuff, stuff that we don't, there's news, boxing media now, but I don't know how many boxing newspapers or, really dedicated pieces of media to boxing there is anymore. So talk to me a little bit about what the culture of boxing was like back then in Scotland. And then take me into how that experience with the American team was. Who was the American team back then? Because when I think about, past boxing programs, our Olympic teams, they were tremendous. They were known around the world. And so I'm curious to know how that experience kind of equated, at that time for you.
Well, I think the fact that we're from America, I'd never seen an American in the flesh.
Right.
I never met an American. And this was Hollywood for me.
Right.
This where these guys were coming. I'm thinking, wow, they're stars. And they looked fabulous, And there was a guy, the only guy I can remember his name off the top of my head was a guy called, I think it was Frankie Davis. Okay. And he was a welterweight. And he had boxed, so it was shown live on TV. And that's the other thing. In those days, the BBC in Britain would broadcast live the major amateur boxing tournaments.
Oh, wow.
International, right? So I'd watched this guy, Frankie Davis, boxing in London, from London on the Thursday night. And he knocked out his opponent, can't remember who it is. But he came to, I think he was a light welter or a welter. And he came to Dundee. And of course, my focus was on him.
Right.
He was from Chicago. And even the name Chicago was, wow, Chicago. Wow, I've seen that in the movies of, Al Capone, all that stuff.
Right.
And I'm thinking, wow, he's from Chicago. What kind of life has he got? And he boxed a local guy, actually, a very, very good light welterweight called Frankie McQuillan. And McQuillan had won the silver medal at the Commonwealth Games in Vancouver, a couple of years earlier, or a year before. So he was top class, but Davis was too good for him. But the whole kind of atmosphere and the thrill, and this is what got me, in those days, guys who went to see boxing did so because it was a key sport for them to watch. It wasn't like you were attracted by the glamour or you were attracted to go and see it because it was a boxing dinner, you were having a meal and you had your tuxedo on and all that kind of stuff. Right. That came later. These guys were working class people who paid their money at the door, went and watched it, and as a result of all that, were knowledgeable about boxing. So just, in our country, it's football, soccer, which is the big sport. But in those days, and even in my day as an amateur boxer, boxing was kind of almost on a par in terms of popularity. So when I went abroad to box all over Europe with the Scotland team. The three major newspapers in Scotland had boxing correspondents who were specifically employed to cover boxing, mostly amateur boxing. And so that was the thrill, the whole thing. And I remember going, for example, Paisley Ice Rink, which Paisley is a town near Glasgow. The ice rink was converted every so often into a boxing arena, and there was 5,000 people there. I went to see Scotland against Ireland. Ireland was a big boxing nation,
right?
You know, lots of brilliant boxers. Scotland against Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was in those days. Scotland against these countries for me as a kid, far off lands, and I'm thinking, man, I'm loving this. I want to be part of this, you know.
Yeah.
So
Oh my. Yeah. I mean, you were obviously immersed in this life. I mean, you talk about the smells and the sounds and everything. I mean, I could just I went down that path with you for just a second. I can only imagine what that was like growing up. And your father ran a couple of clubs. You said he wasn't a coach himself, but obviously he had coaches in the club with him. I'm curious, and we'll start getting more into your story, but I'm curious just from that day and age, what did you notice about the best coaches that were working in these gyms? Was there anything that stood out to you about them and who they were? Was it just their experience, or were there things that they did with their fighters that other coaches just didn't do?
Yeah, I can't really be specific about that. What I can say, well, I said my dad wasn't a coach.
Right.
My dad was a theorist. He was a thinker, right? He was a guy who was self-educated, and he grew up in pretty extreme poverty, but he was well read.
Right.
I mean, my dad would get up at 6 every morning. He wouldn't be starting his work till probably 8 in the morning, but in those 2 hours, you could be sure there'd be a book in his hand at some point.
That's right.
And he was very political. He was very aware, and he knew everything that was going on in the political world and current affairs. But when it came to boxing, he would actually just sit and talk to me about why we do things, why boxers do specific things. And that would all kind of resonate with me and sink in. And this is the thing that appealed to me. So when I say he wasn't a coach, he was a teacher.
Right.
And so we would have, but the great thing in those days, Justin, was that all the coaches at the different clubs, and we didn't call them coaches, we called them trainers. Coaches were an Americanism that came in later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and these trainers were all former boxers, and they were all former professional boxers usually, and booth fighters. I don't know if you know what a booth fighter is.
No, I don't.
Well, the booth fighters were the old pros who would go around the fairgrounds and take on all comers, right? So you would have the fairground guy would be on the platform outside his tent, and you would have maybe 5 or 6 boxers up there with him who were proper boxers. And if somebody in the crowd wanted to pay a specific amount, they could come in and fight, and they would pick their opponent from the lineup. So this guy was, and they would go in and fight and lose their money.
Right.
Yeah, and so you had great fighters. I mean, world champions who started in the booths and then kind of migrated towards proper halls and arenas. You couldn't call them arenas in those days, but
right.
What you could call them. So you had a guy, for example, called Benny Lynch, who was a world flyweight champion. He started in the boxing booths because it was extreme poverty.
Right.
I knew old professionals in my hometown who would walk 15, 20 miles to box in a booth because they heard that the fairground was in this town or that town, nearby little towns that the fairgrounds would visit for a week at a time or a fortnight, and they would walk there to get a fight.
Wow.
Not so much to get a fight, to get the money, because it was abject poverty. Right. Okay. Well, I was another generation. We didn't experience that.
Right.
but I knew all these guys. I spoke with them. Some of them coached me over the years, and you pick up things. But I'm not. I can't actually hand on heart say that I remember one coach being better than the other. What I do remember is my dad sitting down and just talking like this about boxing and about why did he do that? He should have done that. He could have. And my dad had a great kind of thing about being able to defend yourself properly. So this, I hope, comes out through my videos on Instagram and TikTok, where I'm very thorough when it comes to the skill and the technique. I don't want to see people go in there and get hurt. And I want them to go in there and to show that they have skill. For me, it's violent chess when you're in the ring.
Right.
You know, it's to try and outwit, outmaneuver, outpunch, outthink your opponent. And I think that's what it's all about.
No, absolutely. I think you hit on so many points. And one thing that you brought up that I believe I have a 5-year-old, I have an 18-month-old, both boys, I teach my 5-year-old boxing. And one of the things that I hear often, especially here stateside, is, boxing is a violent sport. I think there's still this misnomer, and it is a violent sport, don't get me wrong. But, there's so much value to be gained from boxing. And I'd love to just get your perspective on, what you think the value is, especially for kids, for young gentlemen, for young women who want to, box.
Yeah, well, the value for me is not about being a champion. It's not about winning all these contests. And it's not about glory. For me, the value of boxing remains in the communities, right? So it came from the streets. And I think, it still retains that kind of impression. So when I look at boxing clubs and I think back to what my dad did, these guys who run boxing clubs, amateur boxing clubs, are heroes. And in fact, they're social workers, right? They're doing the job of social workers. They're doing the job of the police in terms of trying to keep people safe off the streets, giving them something meaningful to focus on rather than being out committing kind of petty crime or whatever. So and even today, and I still go around the amateur boxing clubs and meet these kids and coach them and try to get them to think about boxing rather than go in there and try and destroy their opponent and want to be aggressive and fighting and all that. It's all about the thinking for me. So when I go, these boxing clubs are the focal point for young men and now women, of course, who want to join the boxing club. Now, they might want to go and think, well, I can be a champion, or I want to get in that ring and spar. And so often when I've been coaching, I've had young people come in and they've only been in the gym kind of virtually 5 minutes, and they're saying, can I spar? And I would say, I wouldn't, rather you didn't. Well, I want to spar. Listen, the impression that you've got is that you're going to go in there and you're going to knock hell out of your opponent. The reality is you'll take a punch in the nose and you'll think twice, and you might not come back. And I said, I'd rather you came back every week, and I will advise you when I think you're ready to go in and spar. And so you all that into it, psychology of it. But what I like about boxing is that still today there are people who are willing to give their time and energy and effort free of charge to open up boxing clubs, to keep them going for decades in some spaces, so that they're saying to their community, this is your boxing club. If you join, you'll feel part of it. And that's the thing about boxing. As soon as you walk in that gym, you don't know anybody, you don't know a soul in that gym. Within 5-10 minutes, you are immersed. You are part of it. You get the T-shirt, you get the tracksuit, and now suddenly your chest is puffed out because you are a member of this amateur boxing club. That's and it makes you feel good. Now, so the bottom line, what I'm trying to say to you, Justin, is for me, it's not about champions. The champions are the heroes are the guys who open the boxing clubs and keep them running. But
Yes.
it's about producing better citizens. Now, if I feel much happier if I coached a kid, and even if he wasn't any good, and he kept going at the club for years and years, and he kept boxing and all that. When I would love, and I love it when I see him when he's a young adult, and he's holding down a good job, and he's got a steady lifestyle, and he's contributing to society. For me, that's the value of boxing.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, like I said, I teach my son boxing, and I tell people all the time, I don't have any aspirations of him being a boxer, right? What I'm really helping him understand is, number one, there's a building process to boxing. Everything we do, we start from the ground up. We start at the foundation, and that to me is just has set me for life. I understand that I start with one building block and I build from there, piece by piece. And like you said, when talking to your father, it's philosophy. We can't get everything correct in life, right? And boxing's the same way. You can play the highest level game of as you like to say, violent chess you want to, but you don't always get it right. But we have philosophies and how we think, and we give ourselves the best chance of success when we think through certain philosophies. And so I love to hear that, and I love to hear that story from you as well. I mean, that's just amazing stuff. And I also want to add one more thing before we move on, which is, you're absolutely correct. They are the social workers of the community. They are helping the police in the community because they're providing a focal point, especially nowadays in a world where it's very easy to get distracted on so much social media, whatever is going on in the world. Just to have that focal point that has a discipline to it, I think provides so much value in this world.
I agree. And the thing is, for me, I know I've come across, I've got so many kind of case studies, if you like, but I'll give you an example. In a gym I used to train at until about 3 or 4 years ago, just after the pandemic, perhaps. And I'd train there, and I'd do my stint, right through for an hour. And I didn't get, I then began to kind of interfere, if you like, with some of the stuff that was going on. I think we don't like that. Coaches coaching something that's not good.
Right.
And so I would go around and say, look, you want to learn how to do it properly. This is what you should do, and teach them various things. And there was one kid who used to go there. He was 11 years old, and he was so shy that he would stand outside the gym, and it was almost like he was trying to pluck up courage to go.
Right, trying to work himself up.
Yeah, even though he had been going to the gym for several weeks, maybe a couple of months, and I would come into the gym, be outside, and I said, "Right, you're coming? Yeah, I'm coming in. Coming with me then." So that gave him a bit of a comfort blanket, if you like.
Right.
And I'd walk in, and eventually, he became immersed in the whole atmosphere of that gym. And now he's boxing regularly. He's a big guy now. He's probably about 16, 17, and he's a big guy, and he's a lovely guy. He's still shy, but he's not shy enough that it doesn't involve himself with the other boxers. He's part of the team, in other words. And that, for me, that's better than anything.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing stuff. I love to hear it. So obviously we talked a little bit about, your father, the club, you as a young man growing up. I do want to touch a little bit on your amateur career. I read some amazing stories about your amateur career, and I know you've probably talked about it 100 times, but I guess what I want to know is two things. Number one, can you take me through your process as a young boxer preparing for this many fights? I mean, you had over 200 amateur fights, and I know, nowadays the amateurs as well as the professionals, they're much slower. They don't do the amount of fighting that they used to do in boxing. And so I'm curious to know, how did you just stay in the mental and physical mind frame to take on, 200 fights. What was that preparation and lifestyle like during that period of time while you were actively competing?
Well, to be honest with you, my lifestyle wasn't any much different from any other kid my age,
Wow.
right? It's just that I went to the gym 3 days a week and on a Sunday.
Right.
3 nights a week on a Sunday, and the Sunday was sparring time. Well, we sparred every time, but the Sunday afternoon was the bigger guys, the seniors, who would be sparring, and sometimes you'd get people off the streets to come and watch the sparring because they knew it was on every Sunday in a club, in our club certainly, and so the great thing about those days was hardly a week passed that there wasn't a show somewhere. And I'm talking about tiny shows, right? So my dad was very aware that there is no sense in training night after night, week after week, if there's nothing at the end of it, right? And that's the problem now in amateur boxing, certainly in this country, where kids are training nonstop and they're reaching a certain level, but they're not actually experiencing boxing. They're sparring and they're training, but where are the fights? I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was coaching, and there was these two kids that were about 14 or 15 years old, and they, of course, nobody knows me from Adam. At that age, they're thinking about, I don't know, whatever, pop music or anything like that.
Right.
And so I'm saying that, right, guys, this is what we do. Stop doing what you're doing. This is the way you'll do it. And one of them said to me, "How many fights did you have?" And I said, "Give or take, 200, I said. And they went, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "No." I said, "Because what you do not realize, in my day," so I lived in Dundee, and there was a whole circle of towns, little towns in the area that had their own boxing clubs. So, you would get a call from that club in this little town saying, "We've got a show on Friday night. Could you give us a kid, a 14-year-old at that way?" And so my dad spent his time matching up his boxers with. So we go to places like Montrose and Perth and Forfar and all these little areas. And then as you got better, you were in demand further afield. And so the earliest championship that I could contend was my district championship, the Midland District Championship. And there was featuring all the clubs from that district. And there were many. And then you find that if you got to the final, because the entry was so great, you got to the final, you were boxing 3 times in the one night. And so it went on all through the youth system, 3 times in the one night, because I always got to the final. Well, I always won it.
That's right.
So this is the thing. And when I set out on this particular journey, and I'm thinking, people are going to ask me how many contests I had. And I've got to really try and count them up. And I'm trying to go back. And I think, well, hang on a second. Every championship I boxed 3 fights. So there you are. You're talking about, there's, I don't know, 15, 15, 18 fights for a start. More than that.
Right.
And then you go and you box abroad. And you box in Bulgaria on a Thursday and then again on a Saturday. So that's 2. Went to Denmark Thursday, Saturday. That's another 2. And so it went on and on and on. And then in between those, you had your normal club shows, club tournaments, and they were in bigger venues and all that. So by the time I was 16, I had run out of youth opponents.
You went through them all, huh?
Yeah. So at that time, you were a senior boxer. You were classed as a senior boxer when you were 17. Today, it's 19. They've raised the age.
Okay. And
so when I was 16 and run out of people to box, the club I was in, by that time, my dad had given up boxing. And at that time, so my club said to the governing body, "Look, we've got, unless you allow him to box seniors, he won't have anybody to box because nobody will box him. So they said, the governing body said, okay, he can box seniors. It was unheard of. Never happened before. Never happened since. So I started boxing these men, right? So the first fight I had was a guy who was a very experienced guy. It was at flyweight. Now, was flyweight. And he very experienced guy. And he was probably about 25, 26.
And you're how old at this time?
I'm 16.
You're 16. Wow. Okay.
So I thought, right, okay. But anyway, I stopped him in the third round. And so it went on. And then the result was, after all these victories I was having, that I was now being asked to box more seniors, if you know what I mean, more experienced guys.
Yeah.
I boxed a guy who was a bronze medalist at the Commonwealth Games a couple of years earlier. And I thought, right, I'm going to box this guy. And I think, wow, this is going to be tough. He was a man. He was 26, 27.
Right.
And they made it over. Now, this has made it worse. 4 3-minute rounds. Right. For a 16-year-old, 4 threes was a lot. I boxed all my bouts at threes, but 4 threes was very unusual.
Right.
Anyway, I won that one. And so it went on and on and on. And then we got to the stage where my club said to the governing body, why don't you let him box for Scotland? And they said, well, he can't. He's not a senior. So they kind of lobbied for me to do that. And Turkey sent a team to Scotland. And they were boxing in Glasgow on Thursday night. And they were coming to Dundee on the Saturday night. And the governing body said, okay, he can box against Turkey on Saturday night. And I was the youngest ever to box for Scotland.
Wow.
And nobody's repeated that because they never kind of rescinded that rule in any way. So
right, really, you were the exception to the rule.
I was the exception.
Wow.
And then of course, I wouldn't say I never got carried away with it. You know, I'm a great believer in the line from the famous poem If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can take triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. My dad used to drill that into me. When I won the Scottish Senior Championship, and we were going to Mass the following morning, and we were catching the bus to the church, and he said, remember, keep your feet on the ground.
That's right. And
I said, yeah, of course. And so we were never allowed to get too carried away. Be proud, be happy, but don't get a big head.
That's right. Stay centered in yourself.
Yeah, that's right. So I've never forgotten those lessons, and that's why I get infuriated with some of the boxers I see today, even in the amateurs, who, you know, it's become showbiz, and it's, you know, what's happened to the sport, and the promoters have taken it on. And they've taken to a different level, not a higher level, in my opinion, a different level.
Agreed.
And they've ruined it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what an amazing story. I mean, first of all, I mean, just 200 fights. And it's funny that you say, you know, they don't do that nowadays. And the kids didn't believe you because, you know, like I said, I mean, it makes sense. They just fight less. And, you know, part of that I imagine is, you know, for health reasons. You know, we've changed the way we view health in boxing and any contact sport, not just boxing, but even football and things of that nature. But also, you know, it's just a cultural difference. They just don't, you know, the way you were living nowadays, like the way you're explaining it to me this was just our lifestyle. We just went to these other clubs. Yeah, it was just another day in the office. This is what we did. So 200 fights, you guys aren't thinking in terms of numbers. This is just a way of living. It's another fight, another tournament. You know, like you said, no big deal. So it's interesting to hear that shift.
Let me tell you about this guy, Justin, a guy called Dick McTaggart. Now, I tell kids about this and they just shake their heads. Excuse me. Dick McTaggart was from my town. He was a contemporary of my brothers. My brothers were close in age. And he boxed them both as youths, coming up through the ranks. And he boxed them 6 times each.
Mm.
And excuse me again.
No, it's okay. Take your time.
So Dick McTaggart boxed my brothers 6 times each. And he went on, he joined the Royal Air Force, the RAF, and he continued his boxing career. And when he was 22, he won the Olympic gold at Melbourne
Oh, wow.
in 1956. And Dick is a lovely guy. And he is the epitome of never getting carried away with what he achieved. He won every title available to him. National, British 5 times, Scotland 7 times, European, Commonwealth gold, Olympic gold, then Olympic bronze in the 1960 games where we first saw the young Cassius Clay.
Oh.
And then, well, listen to this record: 634 contests, 24 defeats.
I mean, that's insane to me.
Yes.
You don't hear numbers like that. I think the most I know now is your Lomachenkos, and that's what we hear in the States. 200 plus 300, I think Lomachenko had.
Yeah.
But yeah, to hear 600 some and 24, I mean, that's amazing stuff.
Well, that kind of underlines the world we were living in.
Right.
If you didn't play football, soccer, and then the chances are you went to a boxing club. If you went to a boxing club, you weren't just there to train, you were there to box. So you were boxing all over the place.
Right.
Virtually every week. Maybe not, maybe 3 times a month. And so you built up this experience, you built up the reputation of you were good enough, and you were always featured on the shows, and it was tremendous. I mean, it was a great thing to go, I don't know, 40 miles to another town on a coach, on a bus, with all your teammates, and you felt terrific, and you were only a kid, and
right.
It was brilliant. Yeah.
And it literally sounds like it was the key to get out of town, right? It was the key to the experience of travel and visiting other regions and towns. I mean, I can imagine what that was like as a child.
Oh yeah, and not only that, when I became an international, my first international contest was in Copenhagen, and I had the call, and they said to me, "You've been chosen for the Scotland team to go to Denmark, and you'll box on Thursday in Copenhagen. Then on Saturday, you'll go to a place called Aalborg, which is in Jutland in Denmark, and then you fly home the next day." And that was the way it went, and it was so exciting. I mean, imagine going to Denmark when I was 17.
Right.
In those days, you never traveled abroad.
Right.
You just never went abroad.
Yeah.
You went to a holiday camp or something like that. That was your holidays.
Right.
Or we had a place, a little place, a chalet type thing, 20 miles away in a town called Blairgowrie. And we went there in the school holidays, 7 weeks. Went there for 7 weeks.
Right.
And we swam in the loch, in the lake, and we paddled in the dinghies in the lake. That was our fun. Right. So we were totally unsophisticated. Suddenly, I'm going to Denmark. Wow, that was fantastic.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I love hearing just about this boxing culture that you come from. I know a few people now who are training for amateurs. I know a few people now who are getting ready for their first fight. I'm actually, working with a fellow coach, and she's preparing for, her first like amateur bout. And if you had any, just advice for the coaches out there, many of which I know who are currently competing, amateurs themselves, some even pro, what would be just a tidbit of advice that you have for them in their pursuit of this lifestyle and this culture of combat sports?
Well, the first thing to say is the noble art of self-defense is to hit without being hit back.
That's right.
You're never going to achieve that. You're always going to be hit at some point. The secret is not to show that you're hurt, not to show that you're tired, because that's a red flag to a bull, red rag to a bull, which says, "Come on, finish me off."
Right.
it's all about, it's everything is up there. Everything you do in the ring comes from there. And if it doesn't, then you shouldn't be in the ring, because it's too dangerous a place to be if you're not prepared mentally and physically. And by that I mean you'll get lots of guys, and I've seen this in the. Do you have white collar events in the States? We
Yeah,
have white.
we
Yeah,
call them smokers or exhibitions.
right. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, they horrify me,
really. Why is
because
that?
yeah, well, because certainly in this country, and I can only speak for the UK, they
Right.
are not properly supervised medically.
Yes, true.
They have in our country, they have a medic at ringside, not a doctor. With doctor is always at an amateur show and a professional show, obviously. But at these white collar events, or smokers as you call them, they have a medic. Now, last year there was a death in the UK, and the year
Really?
before there was a death.
Oh, wow.
And the reason for that is, now we've seen deaths in proper boxing. And, I'm not kind of setting them aside, but the worrying thing is that lots of these guys go into the ring unprepared. So what they do is they've trained for 6 or 8 weeks and they think they're boxers, but they don't have the discipline, they don't have the control over themselves.
Right.
And they do stupid things, and so both together doing stupid things is a worry,
Yeah.
and so people could get hurt, and they do get hurt. And so the worrying thing for me so my advice to somebody, if you're going at the ring for the first time, you will be nervous. You're bound to be nervous. There'll be something wrong with you if you're not nervous. And what you're nervous about, well, the principal thing I think that you're nervous about is being hurt, right?
Exactly.
And that's okay. That's okay. So what you've got to do is try and control. If you can't control your opponent, at least control yourself. So try and accept what your opponent throws at you, and make sure that you defend yourself. And there are lots of things that you could do to overcome what might be a hurdle, and to get back in the zone. The zone being the center of the ring. That's what you should control.
That's
And
right.
if you're forced back all around the periphery of the ring, there's a problem. How do you get back in the center? You grab, you hold, you
Grab them,
wrestle,
turn them. That's right.
and you walk right back into the center, and you start again. But the key thing is skill, technique, the jab, the block. Nobody does that anymore. Block,
I know. Good parry, right?
the parry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I watched it, and let's say, kid, let's see you stand. And and they're like this.
Right.
And I said, what's that for? What does that do? Well, that could do that. Yeah, but what I can hit you, I can hit you there or there because you're unguarded. And the other thing I hate is this hands on there. And I think, if I had an opponent like that, I would say, thank you very much, God. And I'd walk in and I'd hit you there, and I'd hit you there with 2 hooks,
Right.
and your head would be shuddering all over the place.
Yep.
So hands off the face, hands where they can be useful, either to punch or to defend. And good luck to you.
That's right. That's right. And listen, as you're talking, I'm taken back to, your Instagram post and how you shared your philosophy of always wanting to share value. So I want to kind of dive into, going now into current day, where you start to blow up on social media. I think I have to say, and I'm going to speak for myself. I have a feeling I'm speaking for others, but watching you box is just inspiring, right? I think you put this out there, so I don't think I'm letting any cats out the bag, but you're 78 currently, correct? Right.
Yes.
So at 78, let me just say, I want to be boxing just like you, Frank. You laugh. I'm serious.
Thank you. I
Because,
appreciate
yeah, because I mean, it just lets, I think what it shows is just, the value of not even just boxing, but moving your body for your whole life, right? And making that a part of who you are and just how valuable that is. And that's why I'm in this industry and in this game, is because I like to help people move their body in any way, whether that's boxing or, whether it's just fitness, whatever it is. But back to you. You really have this idea of sharing value on social media. It's not just about asking people to follow you just because, but you really set out to share value. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that philosophy and kind of how you work through that as you go through content for your now buzzing social media? How do you think through a little bit of your content and what you want to share and what you think is valuable for the people on the other side of the screen?
Well, interesting you say that, because I get many, many encouraging and complimentary comments about that very thing. Listen, it's hard for me. I don't see myself as inspirational. I see myself as doing something that I like, and I've kind of fallen back into the social media stuff was by accident,
Right.
and yeah, and if we began to get a following and thought, basically, firstly on TikTok, and I thought, oh, this is really good. That's fun, I enjoy that, and I can do stuff that I've really never done in any great depth before. And I think about, to be honest with you, I'm trying to play catch up here in terms of who are the boxers around these days.
Right.
I have to Google them. I have to look up who's fighting who and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Because
if I read correctly, I don't mean to cut you off, but if I read correctly, Frank, I think Anderson Silva started following you, and you thought he might have been a singer, right?
yeah, oh, there you are,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, I was doing this, and Paul, my son, and he was the one that kicked all this off. He filmed me doing a little coaching thing with a young professional guy in the gym, and he said, "I'm going to put this on TikTok." This was 18 months ago.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh yeah, I've heard of TikTok. I had never seen it." And he put it on. And he said to me a couple of days later, "He said, look at this, Dad." He said, "You've been building up a following. We should do more of this." And I said, "Fine, I'm happy to do it." And I just made it up as I go. Nothing is rehearsed with me.
Yeah.
Nothing. I just go for it. And so, and then people saying, "Oh, look who's following you. This guy and that guy, this celebrity and that celebrity." And I think, well, that's wonderful. And then one day he said to me, "God, you've got Anderson Silva following you." And I said, "What band is he in?" And he said, "He's the biggest the Spider, the biggest UFC star."
Yeah.
And I'm not in UFC or the other combat sports, but now I have to try to learn about this at my age. And even the boxers who are around these days, and it's great. And I watch fights, on YouTube, and I think, and I think, oh, how it's brutal. How can these guys take these punches? How can they, I'm more admiring of the guys who are able to soak up the punishment than I am the guys who are able to deliver it. I mean, and many, in the professional ranks, of course, the difference is that you virtually stand toe to toe, and all the evasion comes with a movement of the head or the shoulder or whatever. Whereas
Right.
in the amateur game, it's mainly dancing around out the way.
It's your feet.
One step in and two steps back.
Yeah.
But so that's the big difference. But I'm kind of this is a fluke. This has happened as a fluke, and it's nice to hear what you say. Believe me, I don't set out to influence anybody. I
Right.
don't set out to inspire anybody. It just and people will say, "How do you manage to punch like that and the
Right.
speed of your hands?" And my answer is, because it's the only way I know how to do it.
Right.
I can't do it
Yeah,
any
well,
other way.
listening to your story, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, my philosophy nowadays, and I keep kind of referencing my son who I train, and the reason I decided to train him so early, because even my parents were saying, maybe a little too early for him, but it's because at that age, when you start learning something, it's not even a skill in their mind. it's just a part of life, right? The same way we run, we jump, we climb, we sing, we dance, we box, right? At that age, they're a sponge, and it becomes a part of who you are. And that mechanic and those mechanics will carry with them all the way into later stages of life. That's the philosophy. And so hearing your story, it makes so much sense why you still box like that at 78, because you, like you said, I don't know any other way how. This is how I grew up.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you're right, it's part of my DNA. And the other thing is, and the other thing that gets people is the age thing, right? I think, what's the big deal? And then I go down at the town or whatever, and of course I see guys my age who are infirm or walking sticks and all that stuff, and I see younger people who are totally out of shape. And one of the things I started to try and do on my videos was to try and encourage people back to the gym or go to the gym for the first time. You mentioned it earlier, Justin, just to get people moving.
Right.
Now, the great thing for me, listen, this next bit means more to me than somebody saying, I won the such and such a title, and I did it through watching your videos. And I do get that stuff from young boxers. I watch your videos and I try and replicate what you're doing. But the big thing for me is that I get people every single day. I'm 62. I boxed when I was a kid. You've got me back to the gym.
All right.
I'm 54. I'm out of shape. You get me back into the gym. And I get that all the time. And one of the things I said was, get down to your local boxing club. Even though boxing is not your thing, punching the bag, skipping, or you call it jumping rope,
Yeah.
all that stuff is important. And just go down to the boxing club, and I guarantee you, I said, you will not be turned away, because boxing clubs are not like that.
Right.
Boxing clubs will say, okay, well, you're a bit old, you're unfit, you're maybe scared you're going to drop dead in the middle of the gym or whatever. But yeah, of course, come in, get the gloves on, punch the bag, and you do that. And of course, what we know, and you'll know this as much as anybody, it kicks off the endorphins.
Exactly.
So you go out and you're a new guy, and you're feeling terrific for X number of hours, and you're looking forward to the next night at the gym. Now, the key, of course, as you know, the key is that you will want to give up after the first or second time. You'll think, oh no, this is too hard. It's, my advice to all these people is to take it at your own pace, in your own time. Do not try to keep up with the guys next to you who can do it quicker, better, or whatever. So this is the message, one of the messages I tried to get across, because for years and years, I did nothing, because I was so busy at work, a family of 4 kids, and with all kinds of stuff going on. So there was no need to. I would think, come home from work and think, oh, I'm not going, can't go to the gym, I'm exhausted, whatever. But then I started to get into it again about 20 odd years ago. And I thought, okay, fine. Then I would drop out for a variety of reasons on the way I'm traveling or whatever, and you miss out. And it's harder to get back into it.
Yeah, it becomes a habit.
Yeah. So this stuff that I'm doing now, it's almost a reason for me to go and do what I'm doing and train and keep fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed, well, let me take a step back. One thing I was going to kind of mention, you mentioned seeing people around your age or even a little bit younger than you, but you're getting a lot of messages, from, people in their 60s and 70s. And I think what really stuck out to me, because I can't speak for Scotland, but in America, and you've probably heard this in the media, I mean, we have really a health crisis going on, and not just in the older population, which was, highlighted by, the pandemic, but also in our kids, and so to hear you speak that and to hear that that's an intentional message that you're putting out there right now, I think is so important because, especially here in the States, there is a little bit of a revolution in the fitness industry going on. I think more people are partaking in things like boxing and other modalities. But it's such an important message that needs to happen, because the food that we have nowadays isn't the same food that we were eating when we were young. The lifestyle is different because of technology and social media. People don't get outside more, at least especially in America. And so being able to have a sport that allows you to use your body in such a functional way, like boxing, or whether it's kickboxing, whatever your sport is so important.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a very interesting point here when you said the food thing is an issue.
Yeah.
And here in the UK, there is a crisis. There's an obesity crisis in the UK. Now, that's down to two things. One, what we eat, and two, because we've grown heavier because of the rubbish that we eat, we therefore can't find the mobility anymore, nor the inclination. It's a psychological thing. So that's number three, the psychology of it. Oh, I
Absolutely.
Now, so what? And listen, I'm not trying to be some kind of food guru or fitness guru. I'm not.
Right.
I can only talk about what I do, and what I do. So I'm lucky. My wife cooks from scratch every single day.
Beautiful.
Right. So we don't have processed foods. We don't have packet foods. We don't have microwave stuff. We don't have fizzy drinks. We have an occasional little bit of chocolate. If I happen to be in the shop and think, well, I'll have a bar of chocolate, and then we share it. But it's only because that works for me.
Right.
And I can't say I'm sounding like Saint Francis here. I'm not trying to be anything different from what I am.
Right.
But it worries me when I look around and I walk down the street and I see men and women, and I think, how can you bear to live carrying that kind of weight? Now, I'd fully appreciate there might be medical reasons for it. It might be impossible for these people to lose weight. But what I would say to parents is, don't get started down that road with your kids.
Exactly.
I've seen it too often. I see kids in the supermarket and they're picking off the potato crisps or chips, as you call them. They're picking off that, it's salty stuff. And the mother's just saying, yeah, go for it. I don't see them picking up apples and pears and oranges. And I watch them and I think, wow. And I look at the kids and you can tell, you don't have to see. I could follow them down the aisle in the supermarket and say, I know what you're going to be choosing.
Right.
Because I could just look at it, So it's incumbent upon the parent to take the responsibility. If your child, which he or she will do, wants to say, oh, can I have that chocolate bar? Can I have these crisps or chips? And can I have this? Yeah. If they're going down that road, say no. We're stopping this, and you will really be tough. However, having said that, Justin, and I hope I'm not being unfair here.
I don't think you are.
What I would guess that the vast majority of obese kids have obese parents.
Yep.
Right. So it follows them through. Now, so I say to the parents, take the responsibility.
Yeah.
Show the example. Show the kids, other kids. Why can't you take part in your physical education at school? Because you're too heavy. Why are you too heavy? It's not rocket science. Why are you too heavy? Because you eat all that rubbish. Right. So where do we start? We start at source. Cut out the rubbish, lose the weight, take part.
That's it. And yeah, we have a saying here, and I don't know if you guys say anything similar or the saying there, but if you knew better, you do better. That's it, right? And so we live in a day and age where the information is out there. I think to your point, I'll speak from personal experience. My parents they did their best, but they didn't understand nutrition in the way that I understand it nowadays, right? I've learned a little more information in my generation. And so now it's incumbent upon me to pass more information to my son, so on and so forth, right? And so, you know, I don't think you're being unfair. I think we're being honest. I think we're calling a spade, right? If you know better, do better. And like you said, you have to be firm in that, because it is not the same food even that we were eating when we were young, and even when we were eating it back then, it still wasn't good. So it's even worse nowadays.
Okay.
So uh, one thing I want to do, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Frank. You've been amazing on this podcast, but I noticed that, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you have workshops and seminars that you're doing. I know you're doing one tomorrow, and that's why we scheduled today. So I appreciate again the time. But I just want to shed a little insight. I know coaches with, experience, much like yourself, but I think some of them would do really well in maybe seminars and with their, wealth of knowledge. Can you explain a little bit about how that works for you, and kind of how you set those things up? Do the clubs reach out to you? Do you guys reach out to clubs? How does that work for them?
Well, it all started because I think I said, like, let's go around some of the amateur boxing clubs. Let's talk to them. Now, it was a bit cheeky of me because many of the amateur boxing clubs these days have coaches who are there for the right reason. They're there to help young people. But many of them do have no experience in boxing or how to coach, right?
Right.
And so I thought, what if we could some way coach the coaches? How do
That's
we
why
do
you're
that?
here, Frank.
How do we do that? So
That's right.
one of the ways is let's reach out to the amateur boxing clubs and say, why don't I come down and do a little seminar, coaching seminar, and at the same time gather content which will hopefully help your club on our social media channels and give you a bit more exposure. And they've been very good. Every one of them said, yeah, I love it. And so we did that. But of course, I'm traveling all over Scotland, and I'm thinking, right, well, I can't keep this up because this is all coming out of my pocket,
Right.
you know. And in no way in the world would I say to an amateur club, how can I? You want me to travel 150 miles and then come back home after a 3-hour session or whatever? So what's happened? In conjunction with that, I had private gyms who were contacting me and saying, we could run a seminar and we would charge, $50 a ticket, whatever.
Right.
And that would pay for your fee and expenses. And fine, okay, if you want to do that, do that. And more people are doing it. In fact, I've got one coming up in Lanzarote in the Canary Islands for a week,
Oh,
where
wow.
where this fitness boot camp, they have them there every year. They're from the UK, and they take loads of people over there who pay for this, obviously, and they have coaches of different sports. And they've asked me, would I come along and teach boxing? Now, what I say to everybody, Justin, is simple. I am not a fitness coach. I'm not one of these guys that jumps in and out of rings on hoops on the floor, or who skips down an imaginary ladder on the floor, or who ducks in and out of a rope that's down. I'm not one of those.
Right.
I'm a teacher.
That's
I
right.
want to show you how to do it properly and how to overcome any hurdles that you might face if you are in a boxing ring. So the upshot is that the response has been phenomenal. I mean, I'm going to the Channel Islands, which is a rather nice place, I'm told, to go to, right away in the English Channel between England and France. I'm going there at the beginning of March. I'm doing seminars throughout Scotland. And in between times, I'm trying to fit in the amateur boxing clubs. In fact, I've got one coming up, and there's a TV production company. I've been in touch and said, you're a documentary, or you're a docu-series. And I said, well, I used to work in TV. I was a TV presenter for years.
Right.
And I said, well, do you know what? If I was still a TV journalist, that would be my first piece of thinking if I saw somebody like me.
Right.
I'd be thinking, why aren't we doing something on a 70-year-old guy who's got, between the two, TikTok and Instagram, who's got nearly 500,000 followers? Why aren't we doing something about that? I said, but no way would I reach out to a production company or a TV company and say, you should be doing something about me. Just so happened that they got in touch. And so on Monday night, I'm off to a boxing club about 12, 15 miles from here. And we've used them before. And I've been there before. And it's a nice little setup in a little town. And it's got some nice kind of good 15, 16, 17-year-old boxers. They're great because they listen.
That's right.
Right. Too young, they don't listen. They're distracted. They're looking at the clock or whatever. So they're soaking all this stuff up. And we're going there on Monday, and the production company are going to come along and do some filming, just as a little thing to collect when they pitch this idea to the broadcasters. But listen, it's great fun for me, and it's kind of reinvigorated me. And what would I be doing otherwise? I'd be sitting on my laptop. I write a lot, and I'd be sitting on my laptop doing all this stuff, and I would be immobile. I need to be out there, and this helps me as much as it helps them. If they get something out of it, that's fantastic, and that's why I love it.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on something that's so true for everybody in the boxing industry or fitness industry, especially when you're a coach or a teacher. Selfishly, there's a benefit to us as the coaches and the trainers, right? That we and I tell people this all the time. People say, "Oh, thank you, you did such and such for me, or you helped me do this." And even in the pandemic, it was very prevalent, right? I'd get people reaching out to me all the time, telling me what they did for me, and I say, "Listen, you don't know. You do it for me too. You give me energy. I get up out of bed because I love to hear that mitt crack in the morning, or I love to push you, in the gym or whatever it may be." But I totally understand what you're saying about that invigoration that you get from sharing your knowledge and just your journey and the gems of wisdom that you have in your head. So I guess what I want to say to that is just I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see the next piece of this journey for you.
Yeah, well, I wish I knew where I was going from here.
Yeah, who knows, right?
Yeah, but it's onwards and upwards. I mean,
That's right.
We kind of came out with this idea. One of the horrific things for me when I went back into the gym was after a little absence of about maybe a year or so, and everybody was using sparring gloves on the bag, right?
Yes.
And I thought, okay, fine. Started to shoot some TikTok videos, just using, the gloves that were there in the gym. I'd take them out the box. There was about 100 pairs. I'd take a pair out and I'd wear them. And I'm not into all this kind of fancy stuff, and I just wear trainers and whatever. Because that was the way we were brought up. You would go to the boxing club and you wore old stuff.
Right.
There was no kind of new fancy tracksuits. There was old T-shirts that you would still be smelling from the day before, and you would anything that you could get, you would wear. And the gloves were old, and they were horsehair padding, and they were not much. But it was all kind of so. I go to the gym and they're all wearing these super duper sparring gloves. Oh, they're really nice, So the gym guy said, "You take a pair of those out." And I took them out, and they were white. Oh wow, they're great, and they were okay. But that was because they were well worn. And then a boxing glove manufacturer here in the UK contacted me after a few months I was on TikTok, and they said, "We'd like to send you some boxing gloves." And I thought, well, fair enough. You want me to wear them on my
That's right.
TikTok. Okay, I'll do that. Man, I never even dreamt that I would say to them, "Yeah, well, you have to pay me." It never came into my thinking.
Right.
So they sent up these gloves. There were 3 pairs, and they were collectively worth about, I don't know, $500, and they were beautiful. And I thought, well, the thing about the modern gloves, the competition gloves and the sparring gloves, they look great.
Yeah.
black and gold, green and gold, blue and white, fabulous. So they sent all these. So I wore them for maybe 4 or 5 times, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I realized, and this is what got me thinking. I realized, right, I don't know if you're aware of these new type boxing gloves, but they're all like this now. So
Yeah.
you slip your hand in, right? And you cannot close your fist tightly because
Yeah.
they're so rigid inside. But
They're too thick.
Yeah. So here's the thing. The thumb is attached by a piece of elastic to the main part of the glove like this. So not only can you not close your fist, your thumb is here. In other words, you can't do that. Now, if you can't do that, how can you punch properly? Because that's where you punch. You punch with the knuckle part of the glove, right? So I thought, I was waking up in the middle of the night with pains in I've never had an injury in my life. Well, I've had a couple of minor things, broken fingers.
Right.
But people ask me, well, how do you manage with your knees and your shoulders? Never been a problem.
Right.
But then I'm waking up in the middle of the night, wow, my fingers. And I realized, well, why is that? And I realized, because I'm punching like this all of a sudden because of these gloves. The gloves are dictating how I punch.
Right.
I thought, right, well, this is not good enough. I'm going to have to. So I went back to the old style mitts, which I still had, the bag mitts, right? And I realized, of course, the bag mitts are not padded. They're just leather here. And they allow you to do that. So I said, what if we improve on that? What if we made this part more padded, 8 ounces, and just kept the old style? It was kind of an amalgamation of the glove, the boxing glove, and the bag mitt.
Right.
And so we did that, and we called them the Noble Art.
Yes.
And they're going off the shelves like hotcakes.
Yes. Where can people get though the Noble Art bag mitts?
You can get them on www.thenobleart.shop.
Okay, let me make sure I note that. I'll put that in the description.
That would be very useful. And
Noble.
You can stick in my Instagram, the Frank's Noble Art, and the other one, TikTok at Gilfeather. That'd be helpful, because here's the thing I forget. This is how naive I am about this. My 2 sons, one lives in Jakarta in Indonesia.
Indonesia, yes.
Yeah. And he's always saying to me, why do you not at the end of your videos say, please follow and share? And I was like, well, it doesn't come into my thing. I never think about that. He said, you must ask people, please follow me, please share. He said that will help boost your ratings, your following. And even to this day, I recorded 2 or 3 videos. And after it, I thought, I never even said that, So for your viewers, for the people who are watching you, I would say, please follow and share. Now, not for my benefit. I get everything's gone up with me, even my Facebook stuff. I'm now getting kids from all over the world saying, well, and it's surprisingly, because kids generally speaking don't use Facebook, but they're saying, can I be your friend? And yeah, sure. Because I look at the profile and I see they're in boxing gear, and I can see they're in boxing gloves. And I said, well, you're a young boxer. Yeah, of course, you're one of my family. So of course we can be friends. And that's great. It's brilliant for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will tell everybody who's listening, who's watching this on YouTube, you definitely want to follow at Frank's Noble Art. Is it Noble Art or Noble Arts? I have to double check that.
It's at, the Instagram is at Frank's Noble Art.
Art, that's right. Just no S at the end. And then just to clarify, it was nobleart.shop.
Yes.
Was the website. Yeah, definitely. And I think, we can kind of bring it to a close here, but I will say, Frank, I know you didn't set out and intend to, be an inspiration and a motivation. And I have a feeling that most of the individuals, whether in our lifetime or another, who have become motivations and inspirations, didn't set out to do that either. They were just doing something that they did and that they loved and that they had a passion for. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate your son Paul for sharing it with the world. I think that's an amazing thing. I couldn't talk about this interview enough. I had a couple of interviews, and I was even telling the other interviews about this interview. I was so excited for it. So I just want to thank you for, not only sharing your time, but sharing your story. I'm a fan, I'm a follower, I'm in the comment sections as well. I will be there. But like I said, who knows what the next chapter is, but it's onward and upward, like you said. And I can't wait to see what the rest of it is. And hopefully one day we get to have you back on the show. I'll make sure that your links and your profile are in the, comment section, and, just looking forward to seeing what's next.
Justin, thank you very much. I've enjoyed seeing you, enjoyed meeting you and talking with you. And I appreciate what you're doing for me
Yes,
by
thank you.
giving me more exposure. Thank you.
Of course, of course. I couldn't help myself. I'm glad we were able to make it happen. I'm gonna go ahead and end the podcast here, but let's stay on so we can chat. If I don't know if Paul is still available, but I want to make
Paul,
sure
Paul's gone. He's
oh,
gone
Paul's
off.
gone. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to him then after. I know it's late over there.
No, it's
So
not too bad. I can't. I'll tell you what time it's. Hang on, it's nearly 7:45 in the
Oh,
evening.
okay. Okay. It's not too late. Okay. Well, we'll end it here, but we'll stay on for just a quick second to chat after this. For everybody on who's listening and or watching, again, make sure you like, subscribe. I appreciate you for tuning into Your Coach's Coach. This has been a very special episode for me. I'm super happy, and again, thank you, Frank, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.